One of the biggest questions people have always been asking throughout history is what happens when we die? And today we're going to unpack one of the more popular, famous, and definitely weirder answers to that question. We're going to talk about ancient India. Let's go. Ancient India is home to 3 different river valley civilizations that have many similarities to Mesopotamia, Egypt, and all the other civilizations we've been discussing lately. But it also has 2 very distinct worldviews that are still very much in popularity in the world today. But first we have to understand what the geography of India is and how that affects the way these civilizations grew. India is a subcontinent, meaning it is a large landmass that juts out below a main continent, in this case Asia. This is exactly what contributes to India's mostly tropical climate. India also has natural barriers of the oceans as well as the Himalayas and the Hindu Kush mountain ranges. It also contains the Indus and Ganges rivers, both of which would produce rich, fertile river valleys. So naturally, because of the mountain ranges that provided protection, as well as the river valleys that provided food production and water, the Indus River Valley and the Ganges River Valley were great places for civilizations to start. It makes sense when those early migrations that we've talked about, people moved to India and they settled down rather quickly. An interesting weather phenomenon, monsoons. I don't like to brag, but I took a meteorology class in college with a local weatherman, so I kind of know weather. And I do happen to know that a monsoon is not what you think it is. Most people think a monsoon is pouring rain, when the water's swirling all over the place and you can't see, almost like a hurricane, but just not in a tropical climate. Those people are wrong. So the next time there's a tumultuous rainstorm and somebody goes, "Oh my gosh, look at the monsoon out there," you can tell them they are wrong. Because a monsoon is actually just a seasonal wind. These seasonal winds would bring changing temperatures and mostly, yes, they would bring rain. And because the people living in the Indus River Valley had an understanding of when these monsoons came, they knew how to accurately plan for agriculture. Assuming the monsoons were on time and the people were right, they had food for a whole year. This understanding is what allowed the early civilizations, specifically in the Indus River Valley, to truly survive and thrive. Quickly, 2 major cities pop up along the Indus River. Harappa and Mohenjo-daro are 2 of the world's oldest cities, and they were built in complex grid-like patterns that had streets in different districts. These cities are genuinely well preserved, so we have a lot of information about who these people are. We call these people the Aryans, and they were very prominently in the old world as farmers and traders. And so the Aryans left a legacy of using the Indus River for survival and understanding the monsoon winds, but they also left us with an early worldview. Much like the Egyptians and the Mesopotamians, the Aryans had an early form of writing. In this case, it was called Sanskrit. Because of Sanskrit, a language that is still able to be read today, we have a lot of information about these people, including their religious and worldview beliefs. We have a set of religious beliefs that were preserved called the Vedas. These writings outlined exactly what the Aryans believed, and it's very clear that they were polytheistic. They also believed that there was sort of a spiritual power from the gods that sort of lived in every person. They called this Brahman. And this worldview is only going to expand and change over time and really encapsulate all of India, especially in the ancient world. But we'll unpack that more in a little bit. Despite the early success of the Aryans and the city-states on the Indus River Valley, India was truly a battleground between different city-states fighting over the rich, fertile soil of both the Indus and the Ganges rivers. It wasn't until about 321 BC that all of India was united under one powerful kingdom, much like what we saw in Mesopotamia and Egypt. This kingdom would be known as the Mauryan kingdom, and it's one of India's most powerful kingdoms of all time. This was because a ruler from the Ganges River Valley, Chandragupta, ooh, that's fun to say, militaristically conquered most of India and ruled with a very organized structure that featured taxation and government officials. However, it was his grandson Asoka who was the most revered Mauryan ruler. Asoka continued the trend of brutal conquest, greatly adding territory to Mauryan India. He also enacted a harsh system of specific laws which were posted on large stone pillars throughout Indian cities. From the trend of conquest to the use of strict legal codes, it's easy to see how the Mauryans were very similar to some of our Mesopotamian civilizations. Really how similar a lot of these civilizations are in the ancient world in general. Unfortunately for the Mauryans, after the death of Asoka, there was a lot of division in India and this dynasty fell apart. About 500 years after the fall of the Mauryans, however, another new family would take control, the Guptas, and they would reign in what was known as India's Golden Age. From about 300 to 500 AD, the Guptas were famous for their academic and technological achievements. The Guptas were most famous for their mathematical achievements, including their creation of a number system similar to what we use today, as well as the concept of zero and decimals. The Guptas are also famous for their religious shrines called stupas, dome-like buildings that would hold religious relics, much like the pyramids of Egypt. So it's pretty clear that both the Mauryans and Guptas were very similar to the Egyptians and the Mesopotamians. There's a lot of similarities in all of these civilizations of the ancient world, but what sets the ancient Indian civilizations apart from everyone else are their worldviews and religious beliefs. See, the Vedas that we already talked about, those expanded into one of the world's oldest and most popular religions, Hinduism. And Hinduism is pretty complicated. Buckle up. All right, let's start off easy. Hinduism has over 330 million gods. Did you catch that? 330 million. And there were three main gods, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Wow, that's a lot of gods. But the reason Hinduism held this was because of a phrase that goes back to the Vedas. God is one, but wise people know him by many different names. So basically what Hindus believed is that there were millions of different ways for people to experience God or whatever spiritual force they believed in. So in a lot of ways, Hinduism is very open-ended, which allowed for a lot of freedom in religious practice, something that many other religions didn't have. But Hinduism is a very individualistic religion. That's really what it's all about. It's all about yourself. Here's where it gets complicated and kind of weird. Remember we mentioned that idea of Brahman, sort of a spiritual self that is supposedly within everybody. The goal of Hinduism is for people to throw off selfish, sinful desires in the ways of the physical world and unite with that spirit. That uniting or liberation from the pains and suffering of the regular world is called moksha. And it's what every Hindu was in pursuit of. And what Hinduism held was that this process of getting to moksha was a continuous thing. It was almost like a wheel. It just kept going until eventually you could break it. Even if it meant it would take you more than one life to do so. And that's where the famous part of Hinduism comes in, reincarnation. See, Hinduism holds something called the Wheel of Dharma. No, it's not a game show. Wheel of Dharma. No. Dharma is the moral duties that every person has to basically be a good person. And if a person is good enough, they would essentially reach moksha so that they would never have to reincarnate again. Confused yet? You're probably not alone. Central to all of this was a belief in something you've probably heard of before, karma. Karma is the belief that a person's actions affect them later on in life, or again, according to Hinduism, in another life. It's the idea of what goes around comes around. So if my anonymous student over here makes fun of me in class one day, and 20 minutes later trips on his way out, I might say, karma. What happens to you is a result of your actions. At least that's what the Hindus believe. And going back to this reincarnation idea, they believe that if your karma was good, you wouldn't be reincarnated. You would receive that moksha, that you would be united with that spirit. But if your karma was bad, you would be reincarnated. And when you're reincarnated, if your dharma and your karma was bad, you'd probably come back in a lesser form than you were before. Hindus believed in reincarnation of other people, or even as animals. It's a very interesting worldview. And it also shaped the way their society functioned. Hinduism resulted in a social structure in India known as the caste system. Like most social structures of the ancient world, classes were organized based on jobs based on their importance and value. The caste system had a deeper meaning. Each level represented where that person was in relation to receiving moksha. Therefore, priests who were at the top were the closest to achieving their moksha, whereas people down on the bottom, the peasants, were not close to receiving moksha. Therefore, in theory, when you were reincarnated as a result of your karma and dharma, you would move up and down the caste system to reflect where you were in your standing of moksha. But below the caste system were people that were considered to be the untouchables or out of caste. It's where we get the term outcast from. These were people who were believed to be so low that they couldn't actually receive moksha. So Hinduism was more than just a religion. It was a lifestyle, and it dramatically affected the way Indian society functioned. So to review, 330 million gods. You gotta unite your soul with yourself, be a good person, and you might get reincarnated. That's the Cain version of Hinduism. It's kind of confusing. And if you're confused, so were the people who believed it. Does Hinduism have you confused? Yes. Are you tired of constantly being reincarnated into random things with no end in sight? Introducing the new alternative to Hinduism, Buddhism. Let's check it out. This was Siddhartha Gautama, an Indian noble who was troubled by the process and confusion of Hinduism. And after supposedly meditating for years in the jungle, he came up with a solution. Well, in the next 10 minutes, and you'll receive Siddhartha Gautama's 8-step program for free. Sounds easy to me. See, Buddhism is basically a simpler form of Hinduism. It kind of takes out the reincarnation and all of the gods and makes it easier to follow. People just didn't like the steps Hinduism had. It was too complicated and just not functional for a religion. So Siddhartha started with this: 4 noble truths. 4 things that he believed were true about the world. Number 1, all life is full of pain, suffering, and sorrow. Truth number 2, the cause of suffering is selfish desire. Truth number 3, the only way to overcome that suffering is to overcome your desires. Truth number 4, the only way to overcome those desires is to follow the 8-fold path. That's right, the 8-step program that Siddhartha Gautama created. I really think this could be an infomercial. But the goal is very similar to Hinduism. It just has a different word. In Buddhism, it's called nirvana, or enlightenment. Buddhism holds that eventually, if you can throw off all these selfish desires through meditation, through following the 8-fold path, that you would be released from the cycle of reincarnation and rebirth. You'd be released from pain and suffering, and you'd be in this perfect, ideal state. Less specific than Hinduism, but it really follows the same general program. Be good to other people, don't be selfish, and truly live in a right way. Because of its simplicity, Buddhism became one of the fastest spreading religions in all of world history, spreading to places like China and the Middle East. Buddhism really spreads and becomes a worldwide religion, while Hinduism has mostly remained in India. But both these religions are still in practice today. And when you look at these religions from a Christian perspective, there's obviously a lot of differences, namely the 330 million gods and the process of reincarnation. Obviously, we know that there's one God and he sent his son to die for us, so it's really not what we do, it's what he did. Hinduism and Buddhism put everything on you. Achieving moksha or nirvana or whatever their version of afterlife is all based on your actions. How good of a person you are. Well, that overlooks the greatest flaw that we all have. We're not perfect. And so that isn't really possible. That's why we need Jesus to come for us. So Hinduism and Buddhism mean well, but again, just like some of the other religions we'll cover throughout this year, they're just not right. Buddhism and Hinduism do outline a few things that are in fact true. They do both recognize the presence of selfishness in humans. Remember, people are lazy and jerks. And typically as humans, we do what's easier for us, often at the expense of other people. And that's truly where suffering comes from. So Buddhism and Hinduism got that right. There is suffering in the world, and it's all because of our selfish, sinful nature. That's a theme that's only going to stay true throughout the rest of world history. But managing that sin, getting rid of that sin, the end goal, well, there's so many different people throughout history that have different ideas about that, and Hinduism and Buddhism are just 2 of them. And throughout this year, we'll look at a number of other worldviews and how they approach this topic and many others. But as usual, that's a story for another day. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.